All right, let me synthesize and summarize Platonic political theory. For Plato, the goal of, of society, the goal of an individual is basically to live a good life. And so, all his ethical theories, metaphysical theories, political theory will basically lead to that, living a good life. Now, of course, what does it mean to live a good life? Living the good life is uh, basically living a happy, contented, and fulfilled life. The Greek word for it is basically eudaimonia, and the literal translation of that is happiness. But the English term happiness does not capture entirely the essence of the Greek word eudaimonia. I, uh, I think the better term that could capture the essence of eudaimonia is flourishing. And so for Plato, basically the good life is about a flourishing life, right? A life that flourishes. And of course, how can we say that we're living a good life? How can we say that we're living a life that flourish? It means that we're living an excellent life. The Greek word for it is arete, which means basically virtue or excellence. So Plato will now relate the flourishing of human life, the good living the good life, to the practice of virtues. Right? That's how important virtue is for classical Greek political theory, most especially Plato, and later on even Aristotle. And so that's why you see this focus of Plato on the virtues, most especially the four cardinal virtues, right? Wisdom, courage, temperance, and of course, justice. So, with this, Plato would uh, go uh, and discuss his political theory in the Republic. The Republic is perhaps Plato's magnum opus. Of course, Plato did write other great texts, but arguably the Republic would be one of the best, if not the best book written by Plato. It could even be argued that the Republic would be the best piece of literature that the Western civilization has ever produced, arguably. Um, the Republic is an integration of Plato's metaphysics, his theory of ethics, what is right and what is wrong, his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, and his political theory. So Plato tries to tie all these ideas together to form a coherent whole. So his ideas about metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and political theory will be weaved together almost seamlessly to provide an entire theory that a theory that tries to uh, explain or discourse on the good life, or how can the good life be achieved. Well, of course, for Plato, the good life cannot simply be achieved by individual efforts alone. Plato believed that living a good life is a kind of complementary activity between the individual and um, the society in general. And for Plato uh, to discourse on how can the good life arise, he goes into discussing with length and depth on how could this take root in the city. because Plato believed that it would be easier to spot how virtue arises in the city, because it's bigger, it's more conspicuous, and it's essentially easier for us to see how this entire process happens within the city. And of course, it will be related to how the good life is seen in the individual soul, or how virtue emerges in the individual soul. It could also be said that the Republic is a treatise or a discourse on justice. For Plato believed that justice is a kind of very high virtue, that it can only arise if other virtues are also present. Towards the beginning of in the beginning of the Republic, you see this sophist Thrasymachus trying to make the claim that justice is the interest of the stronger party. Of course, Plato did not agree with that. For Plato, justice is something else. It's deeper, it's more comprehensive, even more abstract compared to that simplistic definition of Thrasymachus about what justice is. Plato tried to debunk that idea of Thrasymachus that justice is the interest of the stronger party with his a discussion of ruling as an art. Of course, Plato in the Republic is speaking through Socrates. So in the Republic, Socrates said, just like any art, or just like any profession, ruling is an art. And when we talk about professions are always they always have their object as different from the one doing this particular activity or profession. Meaning to say, all kinds of profession are directed towards the interest of other people, of others. Say medicine, for instance, the practice of medicine or the profession of medicine, its object is basically to heal others, right? That's the very function of medicine as a profession itself. It's to heal others, right? Can we say that, well, I'm a doctor and I became a doctor because I want to heal myself whenever I'm sick? Of course, that could be part of it, but that's not the central controlling feature or essence of what the practice of medicine is. The same with carpentry, for instance, right? You're doing carpentry for the benefit of others. Lawyering, for instance, you serve as a lawyer so that you can serve the interests of your client litigants. So it seems that all professions are always directed towards the good of others. Certainly not the interest of the one doing the art or the profession or practicing the profession. The same thing with ruling. Right? The same thing with ruling. Right? Plato would make the claim that ruling is not done to serve the interest of the rulers themselves. Right? It is done so that it could serve the interest of others. Right? Ruling as an art is certainly something that is directed towards the interest of others and not of the rulers. And so how can Thrasymachus be correct when he said that justice is the interest of the ruling party or the stronger party? The stronger party is the ruling party, right? But you see, when you rule, you're not actually thinking simply about yourself, because the object of ruling itself as an activity, as an art, and as a profession is directed towards the good of others, just like any other profession. It's funny, Socrates would even make this argument that if ruling is, or if justice is serving the interest of the stronger party, then does that mean that this stronger party always know what is best for them, right? So Socrates would ask, is there any person who is not, or who is perfect? Is there any person who is perfect? Of course, the answer is none, right? When it comes to the ruling party, the stronger party, the rulers, are they always perfect? Are they always thinking about what is good for themselves? I don't think so, right? There could be other people who's, supposed to be thinking about their own welfare, but as events unfold, they would realize sooner or later that it was actually not serving their own interest, or they were mistaken, right? So the point is, even rulers themselves, they could be mistaken when it comes to their own self-interest. They might think that they are serving their self-interest, but as events unfold, they might find themselves in a situation, in a quandary, where they realize that what they've done is basically for their interest, right? So, for Plato, justice is not serving the interest of the stronger party. Thrasymachus was wrong. Justice is something else. So, what is justice? Plato would inquire. Well, if you look at it this way, so now Plato would go into discussing the society, how it originated and how the different classes come out, and the different virtues that are supposed to be connected to these different classes, and how can the city be justly governed, right? Because as I've said, in order for us to see how virtues emerge within the individual, we have to see first how virtues emerge in the society. It's easier to see it that way. And so, Plato starts talking about the rudiments of social organization. So how are societies formed? Right? How are societies, or how did societies evolve through time? Plato would claim that, society started as very primitive. And at the core of this primitive human society is basically the principle of specialization, because each people in the society, in these primitive societies, are basically specializing in one thing or another, because the people form or join societies for their own sustenance, because an individual cannot provide for everything that he or she needs. She needs the cooperation and help of other people, and so that's why societies are formed, basically to serve the needs of the individuals, right? Now, and so by serving the needs of the individuals, basically, specialization has become the organizing factor in the society. It becomes the organizing principle through which everything in the society was built upon. And as time went on, societies became more complicated. Peoples developed more wants than their needs. And then there also became other various professions that are not really serving what the essential needs of the people are, but basically just the wants and other things. And so the society has become luxurious, Plato will say. And because of this, the society can no longer sustain itself with its own resources. And so societies now need to take the resources of other communities or other societies. And other societies also wants to take the resources of other societies. So it's basically something like that. And of course, in such a situation, in such a setup where you have societies wanting to take the resources of other societies in order to feed themselves, in order to nourish their own needs and wants, not just the needs but also the wants, then conflict arises. There is now the need for societies to defend themselves. Right? There is a need for the society to wage war against other societies. And though this justifies a special class in the society called the auxiliaries, the warrior class, or the soldiers. Well, of course, there's another class in the society, the class of producers. Basically, they're the ones taking care of everything in the society. They're providing for the food, for leisure, for business, and what have you. Right? That's how the society started, right? It started with these people because they want to provide for the needs and wants of other people. So you have now two classes in the society. You have the auxiliaries and you have the producers. Now, the warrior class or the auxiliaries, the part of their soul that is more dominant is basically the spirited part of the soul. Remember, for Plato, the soul actually has three parts, right? Reason, spiritedness, and appetite. So, for the auxiliary class, the warriors, their soul is dominated by the spirited part of the soul because they need such aggression, right? Can you fight a war without being aggressive? I don't think so. So there's a certain kind of aggression that is needed for these people to function well, and so they are dominated by that part of the soul. Of course, the producers, on the other hand, is dominated by their appetite, right? Their material desires, bodily desires, pleasures, and so on and so forth. Right? Now, the thing is, these two classes in the society, they need to stay aligned with the goal of the society, which is basically for the welfare of the entire society. But if producers being dominated by the appetitive part of the soul would allow a free reign of the appetites, that would not be good, right? That is the reason why Plato hated democracy, because for democracy for Plato is ruled by the producers who are motivated by their own appetites, right? It's a free reign of appetites in a democratic society. And for Plato, that's not gonna be good for the society. Now, for the auxiliaries, on the other hand, they need a certain kind of temperament. The same thing with the producers, right? The producers need to control their desires so that their desires would not be allowed to do whatever it wants, to the detriment of other people, to the detriment of the entire community. Now, on the other hand, the soldiers, they need also to restrain themselves. They need to be aggressive against the outsiders, against their enemies, but they need to be gentle towards their own people. If they're always aggressive, chances are, they would turn towards their own people, and that's not gonna be good for the welfare of the society. And so there is a need for someone or some people who can guide the auxiliaries and the producers so that they could be temperate. The producers would be able to control themselves, their desires. The soldiers would be able to restrain their aggressiveness. And so Plato now justifies the third class which is the ruler class, or the guardians, he called it. The guardians, they have a soul that is dominated by uh, reason, and of course they possess wisdom. In order for soldiers to be truly courageous, because of course courage means you're aggressive towards enemies and gentle towards your own people, right? And of course, in order for temperance to be imbibed by both uh, the producers and the soldiers, they needed a guide, and these guide are the guardians. The guardians were qualified, will undergo decades of training. They would undergo a kind of state-sponsored leadership program. From an early age, they will be chosen. They're supposed to be the best of the best. This group of people would rule together the city so that they could guide the auxiliaries to become courageous, and of course to be temperate, and definitely the producers to also be able to cultivate the virtue of temperance. Plato believed that the soldiers and the producers by themselves will not be able to cultivate uh, the virtues of courage and temperance. They needed a guide. They need to be led by someone. And this is the guardians, the most qualified. Now, as I've said, the guardians, this special type of classes who would undergo decades upon decades of training since they were children. They will be chosen and they would be taken care of by the state, and they would enter the state-sponsored leadership program. And they would be tested, right? The state has to see to it that these recruits are not selfish. They do not have the tendency to be licentious. They do not have the tendency to be too aggressive, etc. Once the state sees that the candidates have tendencies, they would be taken out from the program, right? So it's really very difficult to become a guardian class. Now, these guardians also are not allowed to have their own families. They are not even allowed to have their own homes. They don't have private property. They will be given stipend, a reasonable stipend, not big enough. But they would live together in a community life, and they would rule together. Plato believed that aristocracy is the best form of government. And so you have these selected few elites who are qualified and trained and possesses the proper capacities and capabilities of being a good leader. Now, you will not be chosen as a guardian if you do not merit it. Plato believed in meritocracy. Everything that you get is basically based from your own merit. It's based from what you can do, from your capabilities. It's not something that is just simply inherited. Although, Plato believed in basically a kind of breeding process, that the guardians would breed so that they could generate the best offspring. And that's a kind of very controversial idea of Plato. That these guardians would breed, but they are not allowed to have their own families. When they have children, their children will be taken away from them by the state, will be entered into the state-sponsored leadership program to be trained as the future guardians. But it's not a guarantee that these children of the guardians will become the next generation of guardians. They're first on the line. There could be others. It depends on, when the state sees that others belonging to the other classes also have the capabilities. But for Plato, believing in the science of the breeding, basically believes that, there's a great chance that offsprings coming from the guardian class are better suited for the role of the guardians compared to the offsprings of the other classes. As I've told you, that's a bit controversial. But Plato wants to ensure that the guardians are the best people, right? That they're the standard of what a good ruler should be, right? That's why Plato is basically thinking that way. Now, of course, ordinarily, people would not want to become a guardian. Why? Because you will not be able to experience many pleasures in life, unlike the producers. I believe when it comes to enjoying the pleasures of life, it's gonna be the producers who would basically enjoy them all. But of course, to a certain limit, because they need to develop this virtue of temperance with the guidance of the guardian, right? But the thing is, of course, you would not want to become a guardian. But for Plato, these capable people have no choice. Otherwise, they would suffer being ruled by someone inferior to them. And that's not gonna be good for the state. It's not gonna be good for this just city that Plato is trying to build in the Republic. And so, with this, you see now a kind of harmony in the state. When the auxiliaries fall in line, they are temperate and they are also courageous. The producers, they're temperate. So everyone is basically temperate. So with the presence of wisdom on the part of the guardians, courage on the part of the auxiliaries, and temperance on the part of everyone in the society, there emerges the fourth virtue. It's justice. That's how justice emerges in the society. Of course, Plato would relate that to justice in the soul, because the soul has three parts: reason, spiritedness, and the appetites. And these three parts of the soul, in the same way that the three classes of the soul correspond to virtues, the three parts of the soul also corresponds to virtues. Reason corresponds to wisdom, spiritedness corresponds to courage, and appetites corresponds to temperance. And when these virtues are present in the soul, the spirited part of the soul and the appetitive part of the soul, they allow themselves to be guided by wisdom, by reason. And so a kind of harmony also emerges in the soul. And that harmony is justice. Of course, when Plato talks about the good life, Plato is talking about a just life. When Plato talks about a good society, he's talking about a just society or a just city. So justice arises when there is harmony in the three parts of the soul: wisdom, spiritedness, and the appetites. And there is harmony in the three classes of people in the society: the guardians, the auxiliaries or the warriors or soldiers, and the producers. And with this, justice emerges. Right? You see now the parallel on how justice emerges in the individual soul and in the society. Now, so why is it that Plato has so much confidence on his so-called guardians that they can basically fulfill all these duties and responsibilities, that they basically can guide everyone in the society towards the good life, towards the path of justice? For Plato, living a good life, perhaps inherited this from Socrates, is basically living a life of contemplation, living a life of reflection. Remember, Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates is trying to emphasize there a contemplative life, a philosophic life, the life of a philosopher. So, it's basically the philosopher who is trying to walk the path towards virtue, towards excellence, towards real happiness, towards flourishing. Because a philosopher is someone who's always eyeing at the most important goal. What is that? The truth, the good, and the beautiful. The goal of the philosopher is basically to go nearer and nearer the true, the good, and the beautiful. To walk that path, to unravel the mysteries of life, so that little by little he could begin to unravel these mysteries, leading him towards the path of the true, the good, and the beautiful. So, how can these things that Plato talked about in the just society emerge in the real world? Plato believed that this can only happen when kings become philosophers or philosophers become kings. So the guardian class for Plato are composed of philosophers. Philosophers should be the one to lead the society. Why? Because philosophers are not concerned with vainglory, they are not concerned with vanity, they're not concerned with pleasures of day-to-day lives. They're not really concerned with that. What they're really concerned is the true, the good, and the beautiful. For Plato, the true, the good, and the beautiful, they're one and the same. So when Plato talks about the true, he's talking about the good and the beautiful. When he's talking about the good, he's also talking about the truth. He's also talking about beauty. When he talks about beauty, he's also talking about the true and the good. So pursuing the good life is the goal of a philosopher. Other people would not have that goal. That's why they need to be led, they need to be guided by these guardian philosophers. So that even if they cannot achieve virtue on their own, they could still live a good life. They owe it to the guidance of these guardian philosophers. Now, I would like to end with this note. The guardian philosophers are trained, they're qualified, they would undergo rigorous training and tests, etc. But that's not enough. As a matter of fact, that's just the first step. What really qualifies them to be guardians is their vision of the good. And the good cannot simply be understood by their own personal efforts alone. The good could be envisioned if or through revelation. Right? This is actually mystical about Plato. That the good reveals itself to these so-called philosopher guardians. So these guardians, the reason why Plato had so much confidence in them is because these guardians are supposed to have a vision of the good. I think instructive to this is his allegory of the cave. Of course, we are all familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave. That there's this cave and there's these people imprisoned inside the cave, and everything that these people imprisoned inside the cave are seeing are basically shadows of things outside of the cave. It's a kind of reflection or image, a shadow of these things happening outside of the cave. They don't have any idea about that, because for these people inside the cave, the reality of their lives is basically these shadows that they see. And it so happened that there's this one person who happens to be able to free himself of the shackles inside the cave, and little by little crawled outside of the cave, saw the day, saw the light of day, and saw the sun. At first, it hurt his eyes, but little by little, his eyes adjusted, and he saw the reality of life in broad daylight. And he realized that what the people inside the cave are seeing are just mere shadows, corrupted images of what is real that could only be seen outside of the cave. And so this person who was able to free himself returns to the cave, having in mind that he wants to share what he found to the other people living in the cave. But the thing is, these people living in the cave would not accept his ideas, because for these people, the ideas of this person who was freed is very remote from their day-to-day experience. They're so fixated with the shadows that they see. They don't want to see what lies beyond of the shadows. No matter what this freed person would do, they would not listen to him. They would even hurt him. They would even kill him. Of course, this allegory of the cave pertains to the life of a philosopher. This person was able to go outside of the cave and was able to see the reality of life is a philosopher. And how can we say that this philosopher has seen the reality of life? We'll now enter Plato's theory of forms. Plato believed that the reality that we see in this world, the chair, the pen, the notebook, the eyeglasses, the material things, they're not real. They're not real. Plato believed that you cannot trust knowledge that comes from the senses. Meaning to say, any knowledge derived from sensation, anything that you see, you touch, you hear, you smell, you cannot rely upon them. Say for instance, when you see someone walking away from you, what does your eye tell you? It tells you that that person is becoming smaller and smaller. But in reality, it's not happening, right? That person is not really becoming smaller. So for Plato, you cannot trust knowledge that can be derived from the world where we live in, the world we are in right now. You cannot rely upon that knowledge. For Plato, true reality is outside of this material dimension. He called it the world of forms. Now, what are these forms? These forms is the ultimate reality of things. It's a bit difficult to understand, because that's not how we think usually. But just think of it this way. Let's say this notebook, it's colored blue, right? The forms is the blueness of blue, right? In Filipino, yung pagka-blue ng blue, right? The form of what is blue, right? The whiteness of white, the redness of red, right? The form, right? The form of a flower. How can we recognize that that particular form is the form of a flower. How can we say that if we see this kind of object, our mind can tell us, that is a ball pen? Right? Because the mind, reason, knows the forms. Or not entirely, because Plato believed that when the soul was fused into the material body, the soul was corrupted. And that's why the goal of education, the goal of philosophy or philosophers basically try to relearn the things that they have forgotten. Right? Try to remember the knowledge that they have forgotten. Like beauty, for instance. How can we know that something is beautiful? If we see a beautiful person, a man or a woman perhaps, we are like, that's a beautiful person. But even these beautiful persons, they have different faces. Some of them are tall, some of them are not so tall, right? Some of them have long hair, some of them have short hair, right? Some of them are a bit old, some of them are a bit younger, right? They're very different from each other, but reason can figure out that this person is beautiful. Or if you see, let's say, a beautiful natural scenery, if you see mountain ranges, if you see the clear blue sky, if you see the sunset, if you see the calmness of the ocean, you realize that, wow, this is beautiful. But they are very different things. How would you know that they are beautiful? Plato's answer to that is because reason can transcend the reality of this world and go towards true reality, the reality of the forms. Reason can see the form of beauty. And so, when we see different images of the form of beauty in this world, we could recognize, that thing is beautiful, that person is beautiful, that scenario, natural scenario is beautiful, that natural scenery is beautiful, that car is beautiful, that house is beautiful, right? These are shadows, these are images of the form of beauty in the realm of forms, in the world of forms, right? And reason can transcend these worldly things that we see here, that we encounter here. And reason can figure out, can decipher what these things are, what their forms pertain to, because reason can have a vision of the form of these things in the true reality of the world of forms. Very difficult to understand, but that is Plato's political theory, right? That's why I told you the Republic is actually an integration of Platonic political theory, epistemology, metaphysics, ethics, and all these things. And Plato was able to tie all these things up to form a coherent whole, a coherent idea which we can read from the Republic.